What if I told you that the noise inside your head is not actually yours? That the without screens, without voices telling you what to think or feel or want? For most people, the answer is very little. And this is not an accident. The world has become structured in a way that makes silence difficult. There's always something to do, something to check, something to respond to. There's always a reason to stay busy, to stay distracted, to stay on the surface. And the result is that you become a stranger to yourself. You lose touch with what you actually feel. You lose touch with what you actually think. You lose touch with the quiet voice that knows, without needing to justify or explain what is true for you. This voice does not speak in words, or at least not always. Sometimes it speaks in sensations, in a tightness in your chest when something is wrong, in a sense of ease when something is right, in a pull towards certain people, certain places, certain ways of being. It speaks in dreams, in images that rise up when you're not trying to think, in sudden clarity that comes not from analysis, but from a deeper knowing. Jung called this the self, with a capital S, to distinguish it from the ego, the conscious mind that thinks it is in control. The self is larger. It includes the ego, but it is not limited to it. It includes the unconscious, the body, the totality of who you are. And it is always communicating, always guiding, but it cannot be heard over the noise. You have been taught to trust your thoughts, to believe that thinking is the way to solve problems, to understand yourself, to make decisions. And thinking is useful. It has its place, but it is not the only way of knowing. In fact, it is often the least reliable, because thoughts are so easily influenced by fear, by conditioning, by the voices of others that you have internalized. Thoughts spin in circles. They create problems where none exist. They replay the past and rehearse the future and miss the present entirely. And yet, you trust them. You believe them. You let them dictate how you feel and what you do. And in the process, you ignore the quieter, deeper knowing that does not need to think, that simply knows. To quiet the mind is to learn to trust this deeper knowing. And that requires a shift from doing to being, from thinking to sensing, from controlling to allowing. It requires you to stop trying so hard, to stop forcing, to stop pushing yourself through life with sheer willpower and determination. It requires you to soften, to listen, to wait. And this can feel terrifying, because the noise has convinced you that if you stop, if you let go, everything will fall apart. But the opposite is true. It is the constant striving, the constant noise, the constant effort to control and manage and fix that is exhausting you, that is keeping you from yourself. And when you finally stop, when you finally allow yourself to be still, you discover that you do not fall apart. You come together. This does not mean that life becomes easy. It does not mean that problems disappear or that you suddenly have all the answers. It means that you begin to live from a different place, not from the frantic surface, but from the quiet center. And from that place, you can respond to life rather than react to it. You can make choices that are aligned with who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be. You can say no to what does not serve you, even if it disappoints others. You can say yes to what calls to you, even if it does not make sense. You can trust yourself, not because you have become perfect, but because you have become present. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the social world. It is necessary. It is how we function in roles, in relationships, in the structures of society. But it is not the whole self. And when we live only through the persona, when we forget that there is something deeper, something more real, we become hollow. We become performers in our own lives. We say what we think we should say. We do what we think we should do. We feel what we think we should feel. And beneath it all, there is a growing sense of disconnection, a sense that something is missing, that something is not quite right, and that something is you, the real you, the one who exists beneath the mask. To quiet the mind is to begin the process of removing the mask, not in public, not in every situation, but in private, in the moments when you are alone, when no one is watching, when there is no one to perform for. It is in these moments that you can begin to ask yourself what you actually feel, what you actually think, what you actually want. And at first, you might not know. The answers might not come easily, because you have been so focused on what you should feel, what you should think, what you should want, that you have lost touch with what is actually true. But if you keep asking, if you keep listening, if you keep creating space for the quiet voice to speak, it will. Slowly, tentatively, but it will. There's a kind of loneliness in this process. Not the loneliness of being unloved or unseen by others, but the loneliness of realizing how much of your life has been lived at a distance from yourself, how much you have betrayed yourself in small ways, over and over, in order to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid conflict, how much you have silenced your own voice in favor of voices that were louder, more confident, more certain. And this realization can be painful. It can bring grief. Grief for the time lost. Grief for the self that was abandoned. Grief for the ways you have been complicit in your own disconnection. But this grief is not the end. It is the beginning, because you cannot reclaim what you do not first acknowledge. You cannot return to yourself without first recognizing how far you have wandered. The noise in your mind is often a defense against this grief, against this recognition. It keeps you busy. It keeps you distracted. It keeps you focused on the future, on what needs to be done, on what could go wrong, so that you do not have to feel what is here now, in the present. It keeps you from the sadness, the anger, the fear, the longing that live beneath the surface. And as long as you avoid these feelings, as long as you keep them at bay with noise and distraction and constant doing, they remain unintegrated. They remain as a weight you carry without knowing why. They remain as a restlessness that no amount of achievement or connection or change can satisfy. Because what you are restless for is not out there. It is in here. It is the parts of yourself that have been waiting to be felt, to be heard, to be welcomed home. Jung believed that the unconscious is not just a repository of repressed trauma or forgotten memories. It is also the source of creativity, of wisdom, of the images and symbols that guide us toward wholeness. When we turn inward, when we quiet the noise and listen, we do not just find pain. We find richness. We find depth. We find a kind of knowing that is old. Integrate these parts, as you begin to accept yourself more fully, the noise begins to quiet. Because so much of the noise is the effort to keep the shadow at bay, to keep the unacceptable parts hidden, to maintain the persona, to control how you are seen. And this effort is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance, constant management, constant performance. But when you stop fighting yourself, when you stop trying to be someone you're not, the effort ceases, the noise settles, and what remains is simpler, quieter, more true. This does not mean that you become passive. It does not mean that you stop engaging with the world or that you withdraw into isolation. It means that you engage from a different place, from the center rather than the surface, from presence rather than reactivity, from authenticity rather than performance. And this changes everything, not in dramatic, visible ways, but in subtle, profound ways. You become more grounded, more clear, more able to discern what is yours and what is not, more able to say yes to what serves you and no to what is not, more able to be alone without being lonely, more able to be with others without losing yourself. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, is not just a personal journey. It is also a service to the world, because the world needs people who are whole, people who are not driven by unconscious wounds or unexamined conditioning, people who can think clearly and feel deeply and act with integrity, people who are not easily swayed by the noise of the collective, by the fear and the greed and the hunger for power that dominates so much of human life, people who can stand in their own center and speak their own truth, not because they are arrogant or self-righteous, but because they have done the work of knowing themselves. And this knowing, this groundedness, this authenticity, it radiates, it influences, it offers something that the world desperately needs but rarely sees. You do not have to be loud to make a difference. You do not have to be visible or famous or influential in the conventional sense. You simply have to be real, to be present, to be yourself. And this is enough, more than enough. Because in a world of noise, of performance, of constant distraction, the simple act of being present, of being real, of being grounded in your own truth, this is revolutionary. It is a quiet revolution, but it is a revolution nonetheless. So how do you quiet the mind? How do you finally hear yourself? You begin by recognizing that the noise is not you, that the constant chatter, the endless commentary, the relentless judgment, these are not your true voice. They are the voices of conditioning, of fear, of the world that has shaped you. And you begin to create space between yourself and these voices. You begin to observe them rather than believe them. You begin to ask, is this true? Is this mine? And in the asking, in the space that opens up, you begin to hear something else, something quieter, something deeper, something that has been there all along, waiting for you to listen. You create this space through practice, through sitting in silence, through being alone, through turning off the constant input and allowing yourself to simply be, through walking in nature without headphones, through journaling without agenda, through meditating without expectation, through any practice that brings you into the present moment, into your body, into the quiet center where you actually exist. And you do this not once, but over and over. Because the noise will return, the world will pull you back to the surface. The demands will reassert themselves. But each time you return to the quiet, each time you choose presence over distraction, you strengthen the connection to yourself. You make it easier to hear. You make it easier to trust. And you begin to trust your body, to listen to the signals it sends, to notice when you feel contracted or expanded, when you feel tense or at ease, when you feel drained or energized. Your body knows things your mind does not. It knows when something is wrong before you can articulate why. It knows when something is right before you can explain how. And when you learn to listen to your body, when you learn to trust its wisdom, you gain access to a kind of knowing that is immediate and reliable, not infallible, but real. And this knowing, this embodied intelligence, is part of your true voice, part of what has been drowned out by the noise. You also begin to pay attention to your dreams, to the images and symbols that arise when the conscious mind is quiet. Jung believed that dreams are messages from the unconscious, attempts by the deeper self to communicate what the conscious mind has missed or ignored. And while not every dream is profound, while some are simply the mind processing the day's events, there are dreams that carry weight, dreams that feel significant, dreams that linger. And these dreams are worth exploring, not by imposing meaning onto them, but by sitting with them, by allowing them to speak, by asking what they might be showing you about yourself, about your life, about what needs attention. And you begin to notice patterns, patterns in your thoughts, patterns in your emotions, patterns in your relationships, patterns in the ways you avoid or distract or numb. And you begin to ask why, not in a spirit of self-blame, but in a spirit of curiosity. Why do I do this? What am I afraid of? What am I protecting? What am I avoiding? And in the asking, in the willingness to look honestly at yourself, you begin to see, you begin to understand, you begin to integrate. And the noise, which is often a defense against seeing, begins to lose its power. This is slow work. It is not linear. There are no shortcuts. There are no guarantees. But it is the most important work you will ever do, because it is the work of becoming yourself, of reclaiming your life, of living from the inside out rather than the outside in. And as you do this work, as you quiet the mind and learn to hear yourself, you discover something surprising. You discover that you are not alone, that the quiet voice you have been seeking is not just your voice. It is something larger, something deeper. Jung called it the self. Others call it the soul, or the divine, or the essence. The name does not matter. What matters is the experience The experience of touching something that is both you and more than you. Something that is personal and transpersonal. Something that connects you to yourself and, through yourself, to everything else. And in that connection, in that quiet knowing, there is peace. Not the peace of having all the answers. Not the peace of a life without struggle, but the peace of being aligned with yourself. The peace of knowing that you are enough, that you have always been enough, that you do not need to be louder or faster or more or different, that you can be exactly who you are in all your complexity and contradiction and depth, and that is not only okay, it is necessary. It is your gift, your contribution, your truth. So if you're tired of the noise, if you are weary of the constant chatter, if you long to hear yourself again, know that it is possible. It requires time. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to turn inward, to sit with discomfort, to face what you have been avoiding. But it is possible, and it is worth it, because beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the conditioning and the performance and the endless striving, you are there, whole, real, waiting, and all you have to do is listen.